Wine is made from grapes, right? Yes, except when it's not. In fact, wine can be made from any fruit, not just grapes. And there's a whole history of fruit wine in America, but also in the world. So let's unpack non-grape wine, some of the history, and do a little tasting ourselves of some American New Hampshire fruit wine. If you're tired of wine being plain, boring, and the same, join me on this journey of fruit wine. So some of the oldest recorded wine in the entire world was in what is now the country of Georgia. And when I say old, we're talking like really old. So historians estimate that they were making wine from the Vitis vinifera, which is the species of grape that is used for most wine today, in Georgia all the way back to maybe like 6000 BC, which is super long ago. And they would make this wine and they put it inside clay pots that they would bury in the ground because the ground helped keep the temperature consistent so the wine could ferment. But that wasn't the only place in the world they were making wine around this time. Around the same time in Neolithic China, there's recordings of wine being made from rice. Also around 6000 BCE. So for most of history, humans were just fermenting whatever they could get their hands on because people like alcohol. I mean, same. But one of the things that grapes has going for it is the amount of natural sugar that occurs in grapes. Grapes naturally have a good balance of sugar, acid, other complexities in them, which can make a good wine without a lot of extra things having to be added to it. So in China, they were fermenting with rice. Rice also has sugar. It ends up being a different type of end product, but human beings were looking to ferment things that had that right balance of sugar for the fermentation process. I talk about this a lot on here, but the fermentation process simply is yeast create alcohol as a byproduct of them consuming sugar. So sugar has to be present in the initial juice in order for it to turn into wine. So things like grapes naturally have a lot of sugar. Other fruit has sugar as well. And so if yeast is added to a big mush of, let's say, blueberries, they'll eat that sugar. Oftentimes with non-grape fruit wine, some sugar does have to be added because there just isn't enough naturally inside of the fruit, even though it tastes sweet to us. It does have a lower ratio of sugar to juice than grapes do, but legally in the United States, even if you add sugar to that juice and make wine out of it, it still counts as wine. In fact, the US government has a whole legal definition for grape wine versus fruit wine. And even within fruit wine, there's different subtypes of fruit wine. There's citrus wine, there's berry wine, there's just generic fruit wine, which you can make from everything. There's non-fruit wine, and there's a whole legal classification system of these different types of wine. But legally recognized by the US government, it all counts as wine, which begs the question, what makes wine wine? One other legal specification often has to do with the alcohol concentration. So to be legally wine, it has to have at least 7% alcohol and typically not exceed 14% for table wine. It can be above 14% if it is just general wine, dessert wine, non-light wine. But regardless of the US government recognizing fruit wine as wine, fruit wine oftentimes gets a bit of a side eye in the wine community. But it's interesting to me because fruit wine actually played such an important part in initial winemaking in colonial America. So when the colonists came over, they were used to drinking alcohol for a number of reasons. Alcohol was typically safer than drinking water because if there were any contaminants in the water, they were killed off through the alcohol process. Alcohol helped provide necessary calories for people. When they couldn't get their hands on as much food, things like beer and wine had calories, which helped sustain them. It gave them energy. Alcohol was seen as more of a food than a special occasion beverage. And so these colonists drank a lot of things. They drank beer and ciders, but they also drank wine. And coming over from Europe, they were used to drinking European wine. The species Vitis vinifera, which I mentioned before, grows really well there and people could make wine out of it. But that grape species wasn't doing so hot in the United States. There were pests in the soil in America that the vines were not resistant to, and so they were dying. And the colonists didn't know that, but they still needed their wine. And so one of the things they turned to, in addition to local native grapes, was other types of fruit. And if you think about all along the east coast of the United States, there's a lot of fruit that grows there. There's apples, there's berries, there's plums. And so a lot of these types of fruit were being turned into wine. And so the winery that I am going to be trying today alongside you guys is called Hermit Woods. And Hermit Woods is in New Hampshire, which is on the east coast of the United States. And they focus on making fruit wine from fruit mostly from New Hampshire and the East Coast, but occasionally they'll source things from other states as well. And one of the things that they're doing really interestingly is they're focusing on high quality dry fruit wines. So oftentimes, one of the reasons that fruit wine gets a side eye from wine enthusiasts is because it is often made in a very sweet style. Think about that cranberry wine or peach wine that your aunt gets from the grocery store. No shade on that kind of wine. I definitely think it has its time and place. It's a good entry-level wine to the world of wine. It can be fun as a dessert, but it's not necessarily a serious wine that you're going to taste, get tasty notes in. It's not interchangeable with a serious dry grape wine, but it doesn't have to be that way. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that a lot of berries or apples or other fruit lack compared to grapes is the right balance of acid and sugar and structure naturally inside of the fruit. Grapes just do that really well for the most part if they're grown well. But other fruit just doesn't have that same balance. There's not typically a lot of tannin or acid. The sugar levels aren't as high. And so winemakers have to add things to the wine. They have to play around with it, get creative to give it the right balance if they're going to make a really serious wine. And so the first wine that we're going to start with today is this wine called Red Scare. And Red Scare is a blend of blueberries, blackberries, raspberry, and honey. And the interesting thing that Hermit Woods does is, in addition to these berries, which are sourced from Maine, New Jersey, Washington, and New Hampshire, they add honey to this wine. So the honey helps provide some of that necessary sugar that the yeast need in order to create alcohol, but it also is going to add a unique flavor. But keep in mind, this is still going to be a dry wine. It's not going to taste sweet. It'll probably have some fruity notes from those berries, but it's not going to be a sugar bomb. It's going to be closer probably to something like a Merlot. And to add on just how seriously they take their winemaking, the yeast strain that was used for this wine is from the Rhone Valley in France. And after making this wine, they age it in French barrels for 10 months. And so this is going to have some added complexity from that barrel aging as well. But let's stop talking about this wine and let's try it. The interesting thing about aromas in a wine like this is a lot of times when we're tasting wine, we say that we smell things like blueberry or blackberry or raspberry, but those fruits aren't actually in the wine. But in this case, they are. So I'm definitely smelling blueberry and blackberry and honey, but it's not just notes that kind of smell like those fruits. I'm actually smelling those fruits because they are genuinely in here. On the palate, this has nice acidity. It's got just a little bit of tannin. And so I think that this would actually be a great wine for someone who wants to break into red wines, but maybe doesn't like full-on tannin in red wines, because this is fruity. It's not sweet, but it's very fruity. You can taste those honey notes and just a little bit of tannin. To compare this to a grape wine, it doesn't taste exactly like any grape wine I've had, but the closest ones would probably be like a fruity Merlot, or it's got a bit of that jamminess you sometimes get in Zinfandel. It doesn't have the high alcohol. This is a higher acidity, and it doesn't have any of the smoky bacon notes. But if you like that super jammy fruity note, or like a really fruity Pinot Noir, it's got those fruity, jammy notes to it with the high acidity and the low tannin. This is just really drinkable, and it's really surprising. I would have never guessed that this had no grapes in it. This next bottle here is the Winni White. And I'm breaking my own rule a little bit by going from red to white. But this one here is even a little bit more unique than the Red Scare. So I wanted to save it for a second. So this one here has a blend of tomato, plum, rhubarb, peach, nectarine, and kiwi, which is so interesting. So this one branches beyond just berries into some other fruits and tomato. I feel like this is going to spark that whole debate of whether tomato is a fruit or a vegetable. For the sake of winemaking, I'm voting fruit today, so I can call this a fruit wine. But let's crack this one open and see how it tastes. Okay, so before I even swirl this, I'm definitely getting peach notes jumping out at me. So I'm mostly getting nectarine, peach, a little bit of kiwi here. I am getting a little bit of a green note, which might be from the tomato. It is a green tomato that is in this, so that could have a little bit of that slightly herbaceous note to it, more than just straight fruit. Ooh, that's refreshing. So this has definitely those peach notes, a little bit of that kiwi. It's got some bright, almost like orange blossom notes as well. It is, I would say, like medium bodied. It's not super light, but it's still very refreshing. Quite fruity. I would say this is reminding me a bit of a Viognier just because it's got a bit of peachy, but also a bit of that like medium body. It's not light like a Sauvignon Blanc. But it has those really heavy peachy, nectarine-y, floral notes while still maintaining acidity. It's still quite refreshing. But again, it doesn't taste exactly like that because it's not made from grapes even. It is made from fruit. And that's the funny thing about this whole tasting is typically we're trying to map fruit flavors to grapes to try to describe them by other fruits. And now I'm tasting fruit wine and I'm trying to compare it back to what grape it kind of tastes like, which is just like, it's wild, but it is so fun. If you're interested in trying Hermit Woods wines, they have so many. I've tried a straight 100% blueberry by them before. They also have some apple cranberry wines, some other fun types of reds and white blends. Check them out online. You can buy their wines on their website. Both of these bottles here were in the like $20 to $30-ish range. So they're not crazy expensive, but they're just fun. And if you think you don't like fruit wine, give them a try because these are dry, serious fruit wines that drink more like grape wines. You can pair them with food and you can probably fool your friends. If you found this wine tasting interesting, hit that like button, subscribe. There's definitely more unique wines to explore from America and the world, and I'd love to have you along on that journey. And let me know in the comments, do you buy into fruit wine being wine, or do you think it should be classified as something separately? Let me know your thoughts, and until next time, cheers!